Make sure you subscribe. All right, welcome to our second installation of our Extemp unit series. We posted a video previously about the introduction and how to have a top tier introduction. We're going to revisit those basics, and then we're going to move in to the body of your Extemp speech. It's very simple in structure, but specified as you got deeper into the microstructure. I guess I should say it's very simplistic at the macro level, but there's a lot of ways to specialize and get detailed and get a little more nuance in the micro level. So we're going to talk about both of those areas of the body points in this video. So the structure of a speech, obviously, if you haven't seen any videos before, we have the introduction, our 3 body points, and conclusion. It's straightforward, super easy, nothing real crazy. You probably do this in English every day, right? They beat this into you, whether it's argumentative or persuasive or expository or whatever type of essay you're having to write. You're going to have an intro, body points, and a conclusion. Same thing with the Extemp speech. It's going to follow a little differently, and there's some tips and tricks into that to giving an Extemp speech, because obviously you've got to give a 7-minute speech inside a 30-minute prep window over a topic that is unknown until that 30 minutes begins. So moving into the introduction, if you haven't watched our other video, do so. We go 30 minutes in depth into this section. You've got the attention-getting device, link to topic, background, significant statement, source, state your question, answer your question, and then preview your 3 points. Okay, those are the basics. Remember, we talk about in our introduction, we talk about our check the box method, that we're going to have a focus and an approach, especially as beginners, or really even as advanced extempers. You want to be making sure that you're checking the boxes of each part of each piece. So each macro structure, introduction, body points, conclusion, you have a microstructure embedded that you want to make sure you go and check off that you have each of these pieces. I talk about it and usually reference it as a recipe, right? If I'm baking a cake and I forget one of the ingredients, it's probably still going to be edible, not editable, right? Edible, but it's not going to taste as good. It's not going to score as highly in a cake competition. Same thing with Extemp. If you miss one of the pieces of the recipe, if you forget to put the sugar in your speech, it's not going to be as sweet. And so that's kind of how I want you to think about each of these pieces. They're non-negotiable. If you're asking me, every single one of these pieces is non-negotiable. It's not okay if you leave it out. Well, and we're not going to accept the mediocrity of a sugarless cake, right? Or leaving the flour out of the brownies, okay? We got to have high-quality desserts here, high-quality recipes, high-quality extemporaneous speeches, okay? So check the box. Make sure you get all of your introduction in. Go watch the other video. But today we're talking about the body points. And so the body points follow a macro structure that has a top half and a bottom half that essentially mirror each other with some slight minute differences. So the body point top half, you're going to begin your body point with your point thesis explained. Okay, this is a simplistic view for beginners. Explain what you're trying to say. Okay, this doesn't have any direction or substructure embedded. You're just really trying to check the boxes and get a 7-minute speech out when you're following just kind of the macro structure format. So you're going to provide your point thesis explained. This is just literally explaining the argument you're trying to make. How does your first point have anything to do with the question, your answer, so on and so forth, okay? The second part is you're going to go dive right into your source. Provide your raw information. The New York Times published a report that said 85% of cakes are being baked without sugar. That's just data, raw information without any kind of application in it, right? We're going to talk about sourcing in a second video of how to source and provide sourcing. But for this, inside of your body point top app, you want to provide a source. I am of the school that the more detailed your sourcing is the better. I like giving full citations of, on January 23rd in 2023, the New York Times published an article that stated yada, yada, yada. Okay. Give full sourcing and provide raw information. Don't try and get ahead of yourself and start mixing in your analysis with your data or your sourced info. Okay, that's a no-no because you need to be citing exactly what was written in that source. Okay, a lot of extempers and beginners just kind of waffle and meander through this information, and it gets all muddled, and you're not really sure what was sourced and what was their analysis or opinion. And so you want to make sure, check in the box, point thesis explain, source, and then you want to provide some analysis. If you're just doing this correctly and just providing raw information, then you want to provide some analysis on how that information feeds into your speech. When we'll get into the microstructure, this will make a little more sense, but in just an idea of understanding each part, the analysis of that data just says, okay, 85% of people don't put sugar in their cake. That's what's leading to most people disliking cake, right? Like that's an application of just raw data, has no direction to it. How do I apply that to where it has meaning in the context of the speech? Now, I've got stuck on this sugar and cake reference, so deal with me with that. But application of that information to your answer. So now we've said, here's raw information. Here's how I want you to interpret that raw information. And here's how you can apply that interpretation to the overarching, remember, if we remember our umbrella answer from the introduction, you can apply this analysis of like, if people don't like cake, that's what's leading to, our answer of, cake stores closing down at rapid rates. I don't know what's causing the bakery epidemic would be the question. And our answer is that, cake sales are decreasing at a rapid rate. And then, I'm making stuff up as I go here, but you get the point. Provide the source with raw information, analyze that raw information, basically explain to me how I need to interpret that or apply that just numbers or factual information, and then take that interpretation that I have and show how when you interpret it that way, you can understand how your answer is correct. Okay? When you do that on the top half, essentially you're going to kind of mirror that on the bottom half. Now, it's got to have some nuance to it or a little bit of difference to it, because you're not just going to repeat the exact same thing. You've got to do this bottom half with the context that you just said the top half of that point. So you're diving a little deeper. You're going a little further into the point. You're not just rinsing and repeating the same information. So at the bottom half of your body point, you're going to provide a source. So as soon as you say the application is that clearly this is what's causing, whatever my answer is to happen, then you'll dive right into another source. But to go further, The Atlantic published a report on January 6th, 2021. It's not a great way. That says the yada, 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 yada. And then you provide some analysis of that data. Once you provide the analysis, just like you did on the top, here's some raw information. How do I need to interpret that as the judge? How do you want me to understand this raw information? Usually it's numbers, or it's a quote from somebody, or it's a reference to a study, or something along that matter. It's just info. It's just raw, unapplied info. Then you provide the analysis of interpret that info this way. And when you interpret that information in this certain way that I just framed it for you, you can see that the answer that I provided in my intro is correct. And really, that's all you're going to do. And I like to break down inside, and I'll probably do a whole separate lecture on this, but I want you to think about inside of a check the box method, if you're just checking these boxes and giving 1 to 2 sentences in each of these, right? If you're spending 10 seconds doing each of these sections and you're following this format, that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 seconds. That's, a minute 10. If you're just doing 10 seconds a piece, that's maybe a sentence and a half average per section, right? I think that typically our goal is to give 2 sentences, which take about 15 seconds to spit out 2 thought out, developed sentences, not the cat ran. That takes 3 seconds, right? But 6, 7 seconds of a sentence. You do that 2 sentences per section, and now you're sitting at a minute and a half, minute 20 for your body point right out the gate, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That doesn't even include your transitions, which a lot of people will allocate time to inside of their body point. So if you just focus on checking these boxes and doing each of these things, even if it's just one sentence, you're going to take your speeches from 3 minutes and struggling to 6 to 7 minutes and have structure. And you're going to take a huge jump when you just focus on making the recipe as it's called for. Okay. Go by the book, go by the recipe, and add your ingredients in the cadence and order that you learn. Okay. So the macro structure of the body point looks something like this. All right. And this will be available on our free resources. This slide will be available on the free resources tab on our website. But I want to dive a little deeper into the microstructure. So when you want to take, once you get the macro down, you're making that recipe down, now we've got to learn how to spice it up a little bit. If you've watched any of my videos on Instagram, you've seen how we talk about adding spice to our transitions and our body points and our introductions, and really kind of showing you how to start and how to build into a better extemper. Because you don't want to try to start on expert difficulty, right? Like if you're just now learning how to bake a cake, you're not going to go and try and bake one of the cakes that you saw on TV or Top Chef or something like that. You're going to start with a basic box cake. They still taste good and people will still enjoy them, but it's easy for you to get started. And then once you get that understood, once you get a basic speech down, then you can begin adding spice to it and a little more difficulty and some creativeness and some flair and some pizzazz. But don't start with the flair and pizzazz without having the foundation, right? A fancy looking cake with no sugar in it is still going to taste bad. Okay. So same thing with your extemp speech. So the microstructure, we get a little bit more intentional with these pieces. And I think that it's easier to learn the body point and to check the box when you follow a thought process. Oh, Adobe installed. That's good. The microstructure, the body point top half, we want to think about expressing our point thesis as an argument. If your team's anything like my team, you have all of your debaters doing extemp and all of your extempers doing some debate event, whether it's Lincoln Douglas or policy or Congress. We don't have enough people to fill all the slots for them not to have some overlap. And I think that it builds a lot of transferable skills. So if you're a debater not doing extemp, you need to be doing extemp. And if you're an extemper not doing debate, you need to be doing debate because it will develop your thought processes and explanation and flow of content inside of your body points inside of your extemp speech. And it'll make your rebuttals a lot better. So argument express. So think about this as the idea of like the tagline of your link card. If you're reading an advantage or a disadvantage in your case or a contention in LD, you're telling a story, right? The speech says, should we do this or who will be this or ask you a question. You need to provide the answer. That's your argument. Okay. Top half, argument express function as your link. So the idea of like, what's the overarching argument that I'm going to try and make? Then I'm going to provide the sourcing and warrant the argument and apply that sourcing so that it functions as your internal link. So we're going to continue to progress. So the overarching kind of you want to take that background and your point thesis kind of as the link. You express the argument and think of that as your link. Is that what is one reason why that my answer is correct or this is happening is because this argument. Then your sourcing functions as your internal link. So if we see that this is happening, it will cause this, right? We go back to the cake example. It said like 85% of people don't like cake or they're leaving sugar out of cake, which is making it taste bad. Application, now I'm going to function that as my internal link, right? My source warranting the argument that I expressed as the link. Now the internal link goes like if they're leaving 85% if every 85% of the cakes are leaving sugar out, then clearly they're not going to taste good. And when cakes don't taste good, people aren't going to buy them, right? I'm giving you a way to interpret that information. I'm not having to source necessarily my internal link, but I'm making that inference or application or asking you to interpret that data in a certain way, the same way we talked about. And now you apply it back to your answer. I kind of did that in that reference of they're not going to taste good. They're not going to like it. Now on the bottom half, you're going to expand even further. So what's the last part of an advantage or disadvantage? It's the impact. And so this is how I teach my extempers to really have some substructure inside of their body points and inside their speech. And honestly, I really think it makes it easier. It's more difficult, but once you get it down, every speech isn't as much of a struggle to follow and remember everything because everything has a train of thought. Okay, so now you're giving a train of thought to every body point, and so if you get lost or you start to forget stuff, you can just go back to your link, internal link, impact substructure, and then hopefully that will jog your memory and you'll remember where you were going with this. What was the argument? Oh yeah, that's going to get to the impact. Okay, I can tell a story in between that gets me from point A to point B. Okay, so source, warranting of the impact. You're going to warrant that when 85% of people or 85% of cakes are made without sugar, that means that most people are not going to like it. But to go further, the New York Times published an article that said that because of the drop in cake sales, the lack of sugar and drop in cake sales, that bakeries have seen a decrease of yada, 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 yada. Okay, of sales and which is causing this amount of bakeries to close down. And the impact of that is analysis, right? If 85% of bakeries are closing down inside of the last calendar year in the fiscal year 2022, then that is severely impacting the American economy because it is creating a large job loss, and the most cake or bakery shops are locally owned, and that small business infrastructure inside communities is severely impacting and hampering the business structure or economies of the local communities, which shows back to our answer of like, why is this important, or why a bakery shouldn't? It's not a perfect example because I'm working off just a made up question. Maybe I should have prepped a specific question, but the point is that once you impact it out, you have it just, the analysis comes naturally and it builds and flows off of each other. And so once you apply the analysis of that, of how the source proves the impact is happening, proves that it's true, gives you some weight to it, whatever makes sense. There's not necessarily one way to impact this out. And you don't always have to go into, policy style impacts that this many people will die. I think that just showing how that hurts the economy is enough of an impact for an extemp speech. And then showing how impacting the economy goes back and gives your answer, either A, proves your answer right, but depending on the context, you can just talk about how that makes your answer more important and valuable, and the question is framed a little bit heavier, and also reference back to how this shows your umbrella answer. So as long as you come back to proving or weighing or impacting out your umbrella answer, it's going to flow back into your overarching task or your burden, which is answering the question. That's really all we're dealing with here today, is just body point, macro, and microstructure. These slides will be available on free resources on pocketcoachacademy.com. Go check them out. And then we'll also talk about the rest of Extemp unit coming out, the conclusions and transition. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.